Okay, good morning everybody, good morning Manchester. Thanks Natasha. So my name is Mark Rhodes, I'm the Marketing Director at read.co.uk and I'm going to talk to you about graduates today. So we've got an enormous amount of research that we have gathered together, I guess over about the last 6 months, through proprietary bits of research in the field, focus groups. We've worked with SMRS, who you've heard mentioned already today. And what I'm going to try and do is just bring together as much of this as possible in a bit of a kind of whistle-stop tour of our kind of big numbers. So hopefully you'll kind of keep up. I have got quite a few slides. I know that I haven't got very long to talk to you, so come and find me afterwards if you miss anything. So the tiniest agenda, so we'll talk about the recruitment marketplace, we'll talk about what we're seeing right now in terms of graduate recruitment, we'll talk about a few insights around attracting graduate talent, and then a little bit about retaining and still attraction, but really getting under the skin of Gen Z, as they're now called. So very briefly, who are we? We're read.co.uk. This was the very first Reed branch as founded in 1960 by our founder, Sir Alec Reed. I shall jump straight on to 1995. Read.co.uk was the very first website of a recruitment agency business anywhere in the world, which is a fact of which we can be proud. So the screen on the right was the very first version of Read.co.uk. Jump forwards to today. Read.co.uk is the UK's #1 job site. We've been around for 21 years. We are very much a kind of pure play job board. We have about 8 million unique visitors a month. That's us. We've got 270,000 live jobs today. So that's enough about read.co.uk and on to the data. So a word just to start about the graduate recruitment marketplace. And I suppose it would be a bit weird if I didn't stand here and make some kind of reference to Brexit. I know we're all bored of hearing about it, but it's very much here to stay and it's going to be with us and part of the agenda for a good few years to come. So just in terms of what we've seen at the very highest level, we have seen a marginal slowdown in the rate of growth of new jobs being posted on read.co.uk. So in the weeks and months after the referendum, we've been about 8% up year on year in terms of new job postings. That compares to about 11% at the start of the year. So I think broadly, backed by figures like 83% of our clients have told us that they're not going to freeze hiring or recruitment, we would say that the words are business as usual, and I think that's probably something that we've all heard. I think decision making has slowed down. There's various kind of bits of evidence to support that. In terms of areas of growth, I guess the kind of, not necessarily the winners, but possibly the most resilient industries that we've seen, technology, motoring and automotive, manufacturing, both of which potentially are benefiting from the kind of turbulence in the markets and the financial markets, construction as well. So it'll be interesting to see what happens in terms of any borrowing and investment that the new government makes. So that's kind of what we're seeing. I think there are a couple of warning signs that we've noted. We've seen apprenticeship vacancies fall. We've seen training vacancies fall. We've seen banking and finance vacancies, interestingly, fall more than any others. So there are one or two signs. The Association of Graduate Recruitment Recruiters, I think in September, did a report which suggested there were 8% fewer graduate vacancies this year than last. Potentially some of that is a migration towards apprenticeships. You know, the apprenticeship levy means that organisations potentially have obligations there. We haven't seen a drop in graduate vacancies. In fact, we've seen an increase. Nevertheless, I think, you know, this room, the people who work in our industry, I'm sure are aware of warning signs like the ones that we're seeing. So that's kind of the marketplace as we see it. So graduates, there are heaps of them, right? So nearly 650,000 undergraduates enrolled last year. 40% of the UK's working population, probably very many of us in this room have a degree. So they're a really important part of the workforce. You know all of this. In terms of read.co.uk, so far in 2016, nearly 30,000 graduates have registered with us. That's across 125 universities. 20% of those are from Russell Group universities. And 8 out of 10 graduates on our books on read.co.uk are actively looking for a job right now. So that's broadly who our audience is when it comes to graduates. In terms of vacancies, up 11% year on year. In terms of where those vacancies are, London is top, inevitably, followed by Manchester, and then Birmingham. And the reason I mention this is because of all of the research we've done, graduates are the ones who are most likely to be prepared to relocate. And in fact, 3/4 of them would relocate for the ideal job. In terms of what graduates want from a salary, in 2016, candidates who are registered with us who are graduating this year told us that they're looking for an average salary of £28,000. Recruiters, interestingly, on average this year, posting graduate vacancies with us have offered an average salary of £26,966. So that's a very small differential. It's the first time it's ever been anywhere near that close. And it's actually the first time that the average salary sought has been higher than that offered by the graduate recruitment market on read.co.uk. And interestingly, if you look at 2012, the average salary sought by graduates was just under £21,000. So it's grown significantly since then. In terms of the distribution of those salaries, you can see that, again, the lion's share is in that 20 to 30 bracket with a substantial amount of vacancies on either side, so between 10 and 20 and 30 plus. Any graduate coming out of university with who has already achieved an accountancy qualification is going to be able to earn more than anybody else. So that's where the highest likely earnings are, of about £50,000, compared to non-qualified accountants joining accountancy graduate schemes where salaries tend to be around the £34,000 mark. The biggest differential between what candidates are looking for and what is being offered by the market, interestingly, is in construction, where the average salary that we've seen on offer is £40,000 for new graduates versus an expectation in the market amongst candidates of £30,000. So just a couple of kind of nuances there. Vacancy-wise, this is how it stacks up in terms of the volume of jobs available within the graduate market. So you can see education at the top, technology perhaps inevitably second. And if we just look at how that's changed year on year, the ones that are growing the fastest, scientific, motor and automotive. Interestingly, two of the major sectors potentially at most risk of issues around Brexit in terms of funding, in terms of trading tariffs, in terms, therefore, of opportunities and growth in the future. But certainly in terms of what we've seen in the last 12 months, these are the sectors that are offering the fastest rate of growth in terms of new graduate opportunities. Graduate candidates available, well, technology, startups, Silicon Valley, I guess the kind of lure of working for a glamorous and exciting technology company is perhaps inevitably driving people towards technology in lieu of perhaps more traditional graduate disciplines like accountancy. And we will come on to talk a little bit more about accountancy. So last of all, graduate candidates available. Interestingly, the fastest movers, what we're seeing is graduates are signing themselves up for apprenticeships. So apprenticeships, if you just set to one side for a moment any kind of legislation around apprenticeships, are increasingly being seen as an option for graduates where perhaps a graduate training scheme isn't necessarily the right thing for them. So I think the one other kind of point of note here is that charity and voluntary, and we've done a lot of research, as I said, and we'll come back to this in a few slides' time, where we've looked at the importance of social worth and social good to this particular demographic when it comes to looking for a job and looking for an employer. So, so that's it on the kind of market. And I just want to move to some research that we've done amongst graduates themselves. So earlier in the summer, we surveyed about 2,500 graduates, and these are graduates who are coming out of university this year. So when they register with us, they tell us what year that they're graduating. So just to give you some insights into what has driven their behaviours over the last few years. So why did you go to university? Well, I guess the good news is, for any of us involved in recruitment, that over 60% said it was to benefit my career prospects. And now, university, as we all know, is an expensive business these days, right? So it's on average about up to £9,000 in tuition fees in England. So it's not something you just go on and do once you finish school. So potentially what we are seeing is a generation of graduates who are coming out, and they're really driven and they're really focused on their career prospects. For me, it was a personal interest in the subject, and this was before tuition fees, actually, and it was probably in an age, albeit not that long ago, that university was very much an expectation once you finish school. So I ended up doing a geography degree because I quite like geography. And I'm not necessarily sure that luxury necessarily exists in the current market anyway. And then finally, the third most important factor in terms of why graduates go to university is an essential requirement for a preferred career route, so law, medicine, those disciplines which require a degree. We also surveyed 250 businesses at the same time to understand more about how they attract graduates and some of the challenges that they face. And so I guess the good news is that in the last 12 months, 3/4 of employers have hired a graduate. Most of us who have been involved in recruitment, because there are a lot of graduates in the market, inevitably have interviewed and hired, hopefully not fired, a graduate in the course of our work. But it's not just big organizations, so nearly half have told us that they run an initiative once a year to hire graduates. So whether that's a small informal graduate scheme, whether it's one of the highly structured, kind of multi-point organizations, so PwC, Aldi, the Civil Service, Google, these are the really, really supersized graduate employers. In terms of the qualities that our respondents in business told us that they look for and value in a graduate, there were 3 key things that came out, and the highest actually was nothing to do with qualifications. It was nothing to do with degree, it was nothing to do with university, it was nothing to do with educational background. And really it was just about attitude, and it was about resilience, and it was about mindset. I guess for any of you who is familiar with our chairman, James Reed, he's written a book about this. He's so passionate about the concept of mindset outstripping skill set when it comes to hiring talent, and certainly this is something that is valued amongst graduates. A relevant qualification followed by academic performance were the 2 other points that are valued when hiring graduates. So where do graduates look for work? Where do they go out, and where are they starting their search? Well, I guess the good news for read.co.uk and the good news for anybody, and hopefully that is all of you, who uses job boards, is that more than half go to a job board first. So that might be a niche board, it might be a multi-specialist job board like ours. Nevertheless, job boards are very firmly at the top of the list when it comes to starting out. 14% will go to Google first, which means they might end up on an employer's website, they might end up on a job board. Surprisingly, perhaps 10% say that they'll go to the Job Centre Plus, first of all, when they're looking for a graduate job. And so potentially this talks to a lack of support, or potentially some confusion about what the service can offer. Company websites, so where graduates have a very clear idea of the brands that they want to go and work for, and are more likely to go out and seek out the opportunities they're looking for, followed by recruitment consultancies. Interestingly, recruitment consultancies index much highly against an older demographic in this question, where people are more experienced, they have a better idea of their market, they know the brands and the agencies who can help them. And then I think possibly the biggest surprise for this generation or this demographic is that social media only achieve 4% in terms of where people look first. Now, that is not to say that graduates don't use social media. We all know that they do, and we all know that when it comes to recruiting and social recruiting, it still tends to be one of the things, or one of the buzz phrases that we hear in this industry. So in terms of what this audience is doing on social media, a lot of it is about research. A lot of it is about profile building. And so I suppose in terms of what that means to recruiters, what does your social media tell prospective clients about your organization? How well do you articulate your employer value proposition? How much are you building the personality of your employer brand? And so following target employers is very much the top there. I think probably the final word on that, and I'm sure you'll have your own views on this, is that this disconnect between social media and professionalism. And if we take LinkedIn out of it, actually for many graduates, and actually increasingly I'm hearing from many recruiters, there is a preparedness to accept that social media lives over here, a professional profile lives over here, and actually never the two should necessarily meet. But I'm sure you'll have your views on that. Right, so I'm just going to move on to a slide which looks a bit random in the context of all the boring data I'm sharing with you. So does anyone in the room, apart from those who've seen this slide before, know who this guy is? You probably don't, and you'll all be excused and forgiven for not knowing. So this is a guy called Oliver Alcock, and he made the headlines in the summer. And he made the headlines in the summer because he was working for one of the big four accountancy firms, and he was fired. And when he was fired, he decided to write an email to all of his colleagues describing his experiences of working for said accountancy firm. And this email went viral, inevitably, and it made the headlines. It was in the Daily Mail, the Telegraph, Financial Times. And he said there were three things he didn't do whilst he was studying to be an accountant as part of this graduate training scheme. One was learn anything about accountancy. The second was improve his skills as a table tennis player, weirdly. And the third one was give a toss. Now, why am I talking about him? Well, I suppose I'm talking about him really for one reason, and that is that in many ways, and perhaps unfairly, this guy, Oliver Alcock, he kind of became the whipping boy for an entire generation. And I think, in a sense, he became an emblem of what adults, grown-ups, older generations perhaps, perceive about a generation. This generation who can kind of chuck stuff away, has a short attention span, etc. And so there were inevitably headlines in the newspapers, including, as I said, the Daily Mail, which talked to the point around this guy, Oliver, and the millennial generation, the ultimate millennial sign-off. So I guess he is the challenge. You know, if this is true, and I'm certainly not suggesting it is, how do we as recruiters grab the attention of this generation? What do we need to do to change our processes in response to millennials, as so-called? So just having a quick look at the Big Four, and the reason we talk about the Big Four is because they are such enormous recruiters of graduates. So 80,000 candidates will apply each year to the Big Four accountancy firms to work on their graduate training schemes for about 4,000 positions. So it's super competitive. And so for them, it's really important they have the right processes to hook in the right talent from that 80,000 applications. So what are they doing, and what have we seen within that sector, which I suppose addresses some of the challenges that Oliver Alcock has highlighted to us. So things like blind CVs and blind applications. So first of all, unconscious bias. What can they do, and what have they been doing to remove that unconscious bias? Barclays found that even as part of their apprenticeship scheme, when they looked at graduates, they were somewhat arbitrarily looking now at UCAS points as a way to score people coming into an apprenticeship scheme. So as they realized this, they canned it. And the Big Four have followed suit in terms of removing references to educational background, which university you went to, which school you went to, how many UCAS points you went to. So it comes back to that point around valuing mindset and attitude over educational achievement and background. KPMG found that one of the issues that they had when they surveyed everybody who applied for their graduate vacancies was that there was this huge frustration that it took so long. It took a long time to hear back about an interview. The process itself took too long. So what they've done is they've reduced it down, and they do one-day assessment centres. So you apply, you go along to an assessment centre, you either get the job or you don't, and you get it all done in one day. Goldman Sachs have scrapped face-to-face interviews for the first stage of their process. So they're now looking to attract a more diverse range of talent by using video interviews, and we'll come on and talk about video interviews shortly. And then, so I suppose these are just some of the ways in which a highly competitive graduate market is responding to the needs of a demographic with certainly a different set of requirements perhaps to their predecessors. And I guess that diversity point is important, not just from the perspective of legislation and box ticking and being a good employer, it's actually really important to candidates as well. So we've done, as I said at the start, a piece of joint research with SMRS around generational attitudes to work, to careers, and to recruitment. And nearly 90% of millennials told us that having a diverse workforce is really very important to them, more so than any other generation, interestingly. So, a few words on hiring processes. Again, pulling out some additional research that we've done into the methods that businesses are using to attract and hire graduates. So, we've looked at the big four in terms of the 250 organizations that we surveyed. 38% have started to use flexible interviewing. So that might not necessarily mean all the things that we've just talked about. It might mean using Skype. It might mean video interviews. And for those of you who attended the London equivalent of this event earlier in the year, you might have heard Tara from Coca-Cola talking about the results that they've had with introducing video interviewing into their recruitment process. So they've reduced their time to hire by a half. They're doing half as many assessment centres as a result of video interviewing. They have reduced, crucially, their cost per hire because they've taken a really significant step out of their recruitment process. And I think just thinking about the generation who has, as net natives or you know, who have grown up with smartphones from the moment they've been old enough to use them, you know, actually the self-promotion of creating a video about yourself as part of your interviewing process or as part of your application probably doesn't hold the fear that it would for well, certainly for me. So 22% have used personality tests. People can have very subjective views on the value of personality tests. 22% say that they haven't changed their processes as a result of wanting to reach graduates. And in terms of the kind of barriers to using technology to having a more flexible approach to recruitment, there are, I guess, some very significant views based on previous experience about the need to achieve minimum qualifications. There is a perception that current processes are fine, and I guess if you're kind of able to deal with volume or you don't necessarily attract the volume that some businesses might, then it might not necessarily be a problem. Okay, and so just in terms of the challenges around reaching graduate talent, 80% of the organizations that we polled told us that it's becoming more difficult to hire graduates. And in terms of a response, a quarter of them told us that they'll be increasing the salaries on offer, which clearly is not the only lever, which leads nicely into the penultimate section here, which is what graduates really want. So, as I said, we did some research with SMRS, and this was generational attitudes to work. A significant part of that research was looking at what is broadly now referenced as Gen Z. Gen Z being pretty much anybody born after 2000. So this is going to be students who are entering or at university now. And we looked at what it is that's important to them when they're looking for work. Now, surprisingly for us, salary was number one here. In terms of what Gen Zers think about when they think about getting a job. Second was location, third was career progression. And I think actually, whilst salary was, in terms of the research, what we were told was most important, I think probably this is the benefit or the novelty of being paid for the first time, the opportunity to move out of home. Because when we scratched beneath the surface doing some focus groups, what we found was Gen Z, and this was true also of Gen Y, which is the preceding generation, actually career prospects and development and training and opportunities and the development of skills and self-development are actually the most important things. So it's almost like salary is a given, but for this group it's really, really important. And actually if you think about graduates who have come into the marketplace in the last 5 years, they've all done so post-recession. They've all done so knowing that, you know, there's a chance they might not be able to afford to buy their own home, knowing that interest rates are really, really low, so any money they do save isn't going to generate lots and lots and lots of return for them. And actually, what that means is that what becomes important is the opportunity to develop a career, the opportunity to have a stable career with security. And I think we see this with Gen Z as well. Also, interestingly, with Gen Z is that there's a real value on what they can learn from the people around them when they come into businesses. So if yours is an organization where mentoring is important and it's a feature of what you do when you take on graduates or young people or first, second jobbers, then this is something to communicate and articulate when you're talking to prospective candidates. Most organizations who hire graduates told us that they do offer an induction as part of the process. And interestingly, they said that it takes between 3 and 6 months for a graduate to be fully up to speed with their role, which is significantly higher than other members of the workforce, other candidate groups. So, the last section. So what marks out an employer of choice for graduates? So, to go back to our joint research with SMRS and looking at this Gen Y, Gen Z area, we picked out just 3 things which we think probably over-index certainly for this group, and we think are noteworthy for an audience like the one today. So first of all, what's really important to Gen Z is this notion of corporate social responsibility. Continuously throughout all of the kind of data points that we've got around graduates, around young people, school leavers, college leavers, essentially a generation is that ethics, corporate social responsibility, doing something with a dimension of social good is really, really important. And actually, if you, as an organization, as a recruiter, are trying to appeal to this audience, being able to tell that story, being able to kind of spin that narrative into your employer value proposition is really important. In terms of an approach and an attitude to work, Gen Z and, in fact, Gen Y now have a sense that flexible working is really important for them. So yes, it's about salary, yes, it's about the workplace, yes, it's about the job content, yes, it's about training, but actually things like flexible working, and I think that kind of moves nicely on to 99% of them believe that what's important is that an employer cares about health and happiness. So, these are softer, less tangible benefits, but I think if these are the things that are important to undergraduates, graduates, as I said, school leavers, how are we able to articulate this to them in our communications as recruiters, and how can we be really kind of genuine about it as well? Finally, I guess to conclude, I appreciate we've kind of jumped about the place. There's a lot of data there. We will be writing this up into a more cohesive report, which we'll make available to everybody who's attended today. In essence, graduates, they're pretty much the same as all of us, right? They want a career, they want to be paid and rewarded well for it. But they have very high expectations of the process. And actually, do your processes necessarily reflect what their expectations are? And actually, in terms of the values, are you able to articulate the values which are going to be important to that audience? I guess the payoff is that, whatever your views on those things, is that graduates are still very well respected and a really important part of the workforce. And certainly we as employers at Reed.co.uk have a graduate scheme, and the graduates we hire are super talented and just blow me away with how clever they are. And so we asked a kind of last question, which I'll leave you with, which was why hire a graduate? And potential cliche alert, but actually there's some really nice comments that we got back from our respondents in business who basically told us that graduates are exactly what they want. So, ladies and gentlemen, that's it from me. Thanks very much for bearing with me. I hope that wasn't too overly verbose, but thank you very much. Cheers.